Hey, folks, we got a really neat time together set up for here today. My colleague Paul's away. Sometimes people take vacations. It really seems wrong. I know. It's a troubling trend I'm hearing about these days. People taking time off, crazy stuff. Don't forget, every session of Instructional Designers in Offices Drinking Coffee, brought to you by Domino, the team that brings you Domino One, helping learning and development teams develop, scale, and deliver learning that maximizes employee value. Check us out, domino.com. And our team has put the little blurb on the screen there below us. So, hey, everybody, we have a really special guest here with us today, Matt Richter from the Thiagi Group. Matt, you haven't actually been with us before here on Instructional Designers in Offices.
That is not accurate.
Oh, what?
I was with you years and years ago.
Oh my gosh, I'm very sorry for that. So maybe some folks didn't catch that conversation. So introduce yourself to our crowd here today.
I'm Matt. I'm a trainer, and I work with a guy named Thiagi. And then I'm also the co-director with Clark Quinn of the Learning Development Accelerator, which is a global professional community for L&D folks. In fact, one of my friends, Jeannie Bernard, is here as well. So, hey, Jeannie, she's a longtime LDA member. So,
right on.
Adam, you're here too. Cool.
Nice to have new names. Nice to have new names joining us there in the chat. And hey, folks, that chat is there for you. Yeah, no doubt. Anyway, hey, folks, the chat's there if you have any questions as we go along. We'll work them in as we can. Matt, we're talking today about the 5 real drivers of workplace and workforce performance. Tell us a little bit before we jump into the actual 5. I guess maybe some of the things that we're not talking about.
Yeah, well, I think for a while now, we've been talking a lot about skills in the workplace. And before that, we talked about competencies. And before that, we talked about whatever. It also became politically incorrect to talk about innate talents or aptitudes. But both aptitude and skills were fairly well mired into the way we talked about what got us to some form of performance outcome. But more and more, there's research that shows there are other factors that strongly influence whether someone is successful, both in general in their life, but also just day to day in how they go about doing things. One of those is access and privilege. You know, are you born in an environment where your parents had money, or you had access to top schools, or you had access to good food that enabled you to be healthy, or you had access to people who would mentor you and kind of guide you through things. There's also that whole parallel part of privilege, right? So you may have had access, but do you have the funding and just that privilege of other channels? So access and privilege is huge, and the research shows that there's quite a huge impact on that. Another one, which I love, from David Spiegelhalter, who's a mathematician, economist in the UK, is around luck. That we had luck is big. You know, do I turn right? Do I turn left? You might meet your future boss. You might meet your future significant other, and so luck has a big part of it. And then, of course, world events. You know, COVID was a world event. The war in Ukraine, what's going on now, the U.S. is in Iran is huge, and we can't control those things. And sure, they're associated with luck, but they're huge global events that have an impact on us. And so those 5 all interplay together.
Mm-hmm. Sticking with luck for a minute, as you mentioned, it's absolutely just luck or coincidence that I even have this career. The first organization in this space, which actually was Domino, but I started working because someone else couldn't work for them and said, oh, well, maybe, talk to Chris. And it was just absolute, luck on that regard. I did not go out looking for a career in this space. I got, pinged by someone who had this connection made for me by someone else. And from my perspective, that's entirely just luck.
Yeah.
And now I've been doing it for 20 plus years. So,
and it could have been, it's Andy. Andy's the guy you should call.
Yeah.
What if that friend had just said someone else's name?
Yep.
And, the world would be a different place. I wouldn't be here with you now.
Exactly. We'd be missing out on this opportunity.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's dig into the 5 real drivers of a workforce performance a little deeper. Where do you want to start with that?
I don't know. You pick randomly.
Let's reiterate the 5 just so people can know what they're
Sure.
voting on.
Aptitude. I can't. Aptitude, skill, luck, access and privilege, and big world events.
Ilya from our team throwing in aptitude.
Aptitude is huge. Aptitude is big because there's a part where there's a genetic or organismic component to how successful we are. There's a piece of how intelligent one is. Am I born in a way where I'm going to be tall, or am I going to be short? There's a genetic component to our capabilities, and that interplays with the environment as well. So I may have a certain level of base intelligence, but if that doesn't get catered to and fostered, then that level of aptitude doesn't come out. And so you have a bit of innate components that are really, really definitive in whether, we are able to do stuff. The trick is that it's really hard to tell if something is skill or talent. And John Medina, the neuroscientist, he said, yeah, it's always skill or talent. But who cares which is which, though? Because we can't tell. We won't know, right? And then skill is the stuff that we can practice, that we get better at. But that practice requires us to practice with good instructional design around that. We need to have what Erickson called deliberate practice access. And so if I have some talent and I have the structure to go through good learning and practice opportunities with feedback, then I do better.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, aptitude, one of the things that we're kind of shaping around in our discussion here today is, what are the things where the L&D team can actually have an effect, can actually cause something beneficial to happen. So it seems to me, though, that aptitude really isn't something, or is it that an L&D team can actually shape or contribute to or
well, I think it is.
Okay.
I think we can partner with HR or talent management or whatever it's called nowadays. And we can identify what people have an inclination to do, and we can foster that. And I'm not advocating for doing IQ tests in the workplace. I'm not advocating for anything like that. But there are things that people like to do, and we can find ways to embrace that and help develop through skill building. We can also look at how we marry aptitude to access and privilege. So those interests that people have, are we inviting people to engage in that? I would really urge our L&D teams to actually work in the communities. It all starts in schools. So what are we doing in our communities to provide access to people? How are we going out coaching? As a 40-year-old, I'm not 40 anymore, but when I was 40, did I go out and volunteer and mentor folks in the community? What are we doing as an L&D team in our communities to enhance those points of access and privilege? Not much we can do about luck, but what we can do is when someone is hit with bad luck, how do we help them recover from that? And David is pointing out that when COVID hits, that's a world event. So how do we embrace these as opportunities? Keith Grint, the historian, talks about wicked tame and critical problems, and COVID was a wicked problem. So how do we navigate through that as we go through? And L&D can certainly have a huge role in brainstorming and being a part of coming up with some kind of set of solutions for these wicked problems. So L&D can touch on all of them.
That's interesting. I guess I was thinking when about aptitude was like, if someone's already in a job, I hadn't thought of the idea of helping people find the things that fit them, that sort of pre-step. Because I guess maybe I was thinking from the frame of the L&D team is creating content or training programs or experiences and all of those sorts of things that we traditionally do, or more about roles versus maybe the pre-steps of getting people into the right roles. Huh.
Well, I like that frame, and let's just pull the string a little. Can we talk about what development really means?
Sure.
Right? So development, we can think of development as, okay, you're already on your trajectory. So we're going to develop you and provide opportunities for you to continue down that straight linear line. Or we could look at development as zigzagging all around. And, if we do that, are we finding ways to enhance overall well-being? Are we finding ways to get people excited about what they're working on? Are there ways for people to go down that straight linear line, but develop other areas that may become of interest in new straight lines later for them? What do we mean by development organizationally, and how does that enhance well-being and satisfaction in the workplace?
So we did get a couple of votes, as well for skill in the chat too. Let's dwell on that for a bit.
I like to play the guitar. One of the things that I've had to do over the years is practice. I'm taught how to play the guitar by a teacher. I'm taught scales. I'm taught how to read music. I'm taught fingering position on the guitar on the fretboard, and then how do you engage with the strings. And I'm taught how to put stuff together. But that requires then guided instruction with practice opportunities. And those practice opportunities then require feedback. So my teacher would give me feedback. And as I got better and better, I started to play out with audiences. And whether they booed me or walked out, that was feedback. But it wasn't useful feedback unless someone told me, here's what you did wrong. And here's what you can do to do things better. And so skills develop through guided instruction, practice opportunities, and informational feedback, and then back again as you go through it. So skills are great. We need to develop skills, but you don't develop skills without some form of thoughtful instruction, practice, and feedback. And of course, you probably need an interest in it, and you probably need to have some form of aptitude that goes with it. And then, of course, access, privilege, luck, and world events get in the way.
Very cool. David's noting in the chat skill theme at last year's Canadian e-learning conference, and a little plug. I'm
actually, Canada.
Yeah. Hey, that conference is in late May this year in Niagara Falls. I'll be there. My colleague Paul, who's not with us today, but will also be there. We have a couple of things going on there. So if you're on the north side of the border and in this space, check out that conference. It's really quite substantive for those of us in the practice here in Canada. So, all right, shameless plug over. Let's maybe shift around then to privilege.
Well, David asked a question about some examples. Can I quickly give some examples?
Sure. Yeah.
So world events, David already gave us one, which is COVID, right? Luck might be I'm on the train and I'm sitting next to a professor who is really interesting, and he at the end of the train ride says, hey, why don't you come to the campus and we'll talk about you going back to school and working on a graduate degree. If you hadn't sat next to that person, you don't get that. Or luck might be you're on an airplane and it's the date is September 11th and you're flying to Washington D.C. or whatnot, and the plane is hijacked. That's bad luck. Spiegelhalter gives actually, I'm not sure if it's Spiegelhalter or if it was Brian Kloss. I think it might have been Brian Kloss who writes about 9/11, all the factors of luck that came into play on who lived and who died that day, just on did I turn left or did I turn right? And so luck can show up in different ways. There's the luck to whom you're born to, the existential luck, right? There's which country are you in? A country that's got a lot of money and different schools that are available to everyone, better healthcare, better food, etc. All of these things are pretty big around luck. Access and privilege. If my parents didn't let me play the guitar, I wouldn't have had access to playing the guitar. If you're born to a family with money, you tend to have a lot of things available to you. but you also need to get access because your parents will let you. Bill Gates is a wonderful case study of access and privilege. He worked hard. He had a lot of great ideas. He was certainly smart, but boy, did he get lucky in life. He drew that winning lottery card, right? So that's luck in different levels. Skill we talked about, and I think we talked about aptitude as well. Right. So aptitude might be general intelligence, musical capability, etc.
Hmm. Cool. And David's saying those who have the force don't believe in luck. So, for
But
us,
those who have the force got lucky to begin with to be able to be in a movie.
yeah.
Sorry, my jokes take a while before.
No,
they hit.
it's all good. Let's circle back and then start thinking about the ways then that those of us in the L&D space can actually continue to support or what impacts we can have on some of those things. I'm trying to remember if, okay, mental blank here. Which ones haven't we talked about yet at a further level?
I don't know. I think we've hit them all. I mean, look, what do we have access to? Obviously, as you mentioned, we have direct access over skill, right? That's the obvious one. But I think we if we're not realizing that some people have been successful because luck played a role, we're not acknowledging reality. There is absolutely an interplay between all five of these factors. And so as L&D, we should be sitting down and saying, how do we make things more fair? How do we deal with equity? How do we make sure people coming into our company are getting a fair shake? And what about people to whom we're not even looking at? Is there a reason? Well, maybe they don't have experience or they don't have capability today, but is there some kind of program where we could work on developing people who may not qualify today, but certainly could tomorrow? What is our big picture for creating a more equitable environment for our communities? How do we as L&D play a role in mitigating things when they go wrong? Failure is one of the most important ways in which we learn, but do we really embrace failure? And how much of failure has a luck component to it as well? Sometimes it's because we don't know what the heck we're doing, but sometimes it's just because, something bad happened. Power goes out right at the worst time.
Mm-hmm.
So, we in L&D can play a leadership role in navigating how all five of these get addressed at a policy level. Maybe we're not the decision makers, but boy, we could make a good sale.
Mm-hmm.
Or try at least.
One of the themes that we've always seemed to end up circling back to throughout our entire time doing Idiotic here is that how does the L&D team make a bigger difference by moving from being perceived as a service provider? Here's 5 PowerPoints or here's a manual or a set of PDFs, make us a training course, to being something that can be having a greater voice in the organization as a whole, getting out of that box. So how do we start taking some of these conversations then outside of our own L&D team?
Let's elevate our game. Let's stop being order takers. Let's stop doing junk. Let's stop doing MBTI disc or insights or tools that have been long debunked. Let's stop talking about learning styles. Let's stop doing content or interventions that have no impact. And let's actually do real evaluation. If you go with Will Tallheimer's LTEM, at a level 5 or higher, let's measure actually whether people are learning and not just whether they're sitting in seats. Let's actually have an impact. And to do that, we need to start talking about standards. ISPI, ATD, IBSTIPI, everyone's got their version of some form of standards, but we're the only industry that doesn't have a common set of standards, right? Medicine has standards. You cannot become an accountant and work in finance without having met a core set, agreed upon set of standards. But L&D wants to be a profession. We should have a core set of standards. Who should set those standards? That's not my problem. That's someone else's problem. But if we want to claim to be a profession, we should actually act like it.
Hmm. So many of us come into this space. I mean, even my example of my luck getting in, we come in from side methods, etc. We don't really, um, you're not at the end of, your high school or in your university career or something and saying, oh, this is where I want to, go. And do we end up being tapped on the shoulder? Oh, hey, you know about this. Can you run a workshop for the others people? Or you're good with graphic design and a bunch of other tools. Why don't you help us make e-learning courses or something like that? It really does feel we've got this traditional kind of apprenticeship model where you learn from the people who are your bosses, and you do the things that people ahead of you in these roles have done, and that may bring some good habits, but it also brings lots of poorer habits. It also brings lots of misconceptions. It also brings in a lot of things. You've just mentioned a few things that we shouldn't do, and those are often things that we inherit because someone else,
Exactly.
previously has been doing those. So having this having something as a more formal identifier, as you say, standards that you are meeting them helps us also then break out from the inheritances that we have when we're pulled into the L&D team roles.
I totally agree with that. We've all done it. So I used to sell discs. Tiagi and I made more money selling discs than we've ever made anything else. So we've all done it. I didn't know any better back then. And part of that is because the disc people we were dealing with told us that it was research based. And I didn't know what research based meant. I thought I did, but that was good enough. And so I think we need to increase our literacy around what good research looks like. We need to challenge when people say research says ... And I think that should become a core competency that every standardization process should have. Anyone who says research says should be immediately challenged. Show me what research. Is it replicated? How was it done? Were there conflicting agendas by the people who ran it? And so forth. We should all have a base understanding of what statistics are and how to read at a fundamental level, right? We can do statistics for L&D pros. We don't need to do statistics for physics folks, right? So we need to get better at that. And we need to get better at what we put in front of our stakeholders. And we got to be better at challenging our stakeholders. Autumn had as a big comment here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Autumn was saying, I feel like people who have challenges, which they do not feel comfortable disclosing, could be creating barriers to their own success. If we provide space for openness, it provides room to create a more equitable development.
Yeah, I think that's probably true because people who don't necessarily have access and privilege opportunities don't want to necessarily acknowledge that because they're punished or they're put in behind an 8 ball or they even fall further down as they go. So acknowledging our vulnerabilities is really problematic. So I totally agree. And I think that's something we can model as well as we can develop management and leadership to do better as well. When we see someone doesn't have access to something or is lacking a skill, our first response should be, how do we backfill that?
And that can be hard, though, especially in a really large organization where, thousands, if not tens of thousands of folks come into contact with us, or at least with the programs that we create. So it's not an easy nut to crack, potentially.
No, but we could also look at it that they have more resources too. So, it's tough if it's a small company with few resources. It's tough if it's a big company, but with lots of resources. So it's tough regardless.
Mm.
How are we going to address it?
Mm.
Again, we gotta take a step back and say, what's our purpose? What's the meaning of life for us in L&D? And if it's simply to infotain or to backdate some skills for a database, then all we will ever be are order takers. But if our real purpose is to find ways through the course of work to develop people toward higher levels of actualization, then we're doing good stuff. Maybe we should re-narrativize the story we're telling about what our role is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I may be going. We're not recording this, right? So
no, nothing's here.
Okay,
Nope,
so I'm not going to get in trouble, right?
No, it's just between you and I.
Okay, good.
Just a private conversation. um, yeah, we've had some great comments in the chat, folks. Don't forget that that's there for you. I'm just scrolling back to see if there was anything that we might have missed so far.
I like David's comment about who's the next chosen one. The idea that someone is the chosen one is really bothersome in so many levels, but it's there.
Elaborate on that for a bit for me here.
Usually when someone is earmarked as the chosen one, we stop developing others. And that one person becomes the expected head of whatever, whether it's a functional role, a titled role, or whatever. But it also means that we put a ton of resources behind that person and we stop putting resources behind others. And that's not a good way for us to be. Sure, we need to have succession planning. Succession planning doesn't necessarily mean that we have identified a quote chosen one, but it does mean, in succession planning is that maybe we have 3 or 4 people that might take on that functional role, but everyone can be taken care of and supported and advanced in ways that work.
Mm-hmm. The chosen one, I guess, is really a pretty prime example of privilege, or it becomes an example then of privilege, that someone is being privileged above others,
right,
because of that designation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Autumn's tossing into the chat there's a difference between checking the boxes of learning and development and striving towards the actualization that you spoke of, Matt. Yeah, I mean, so much of what we do is about making sure that there are the CYA aspect of what we do for corporate, for the organizational points, whether that's, security related things, to make sure that the folks are being, well versed in that, to reduce risk, or other skills, etc., related to that, those kind of risk areas.
I really like Keith Grint's typology around problems, and he got it from Rattel and Weber back in the late 60s, I think, around wicked tame and critical problems. And I think if we try and categorize on an intake level, here's the problem we're being asked to help solve. At a wicked problem, we can be looking at actualization opportunities or access and privilege opportunities to fix, or how to mitigate someone's failure that was unlucky. But on that tame problem level, we can deal with, okay, we have a tactical problem that we need to fix. We need to upskill someone because it's a new database coming in, or it's an emergency and we need to make sure that everyone can figure out how to work from home during COVID. And that becomes a critical problem. And L&D can categorize the types of problems we're dealing with. And that makes it a little more universal and hopefully strategic as we go through it.
Mm-hmm.
I love, Jeannie, I love 6 boxes for identifying stuff. And, that everything should work in 6s. But sorry, bad joke.
I mean, elaborate a little bit, because actually the 6 boxes model is something that I've heard of, but myself, I don't have much experience with it. So maybe just flesh that out.
Well, it depends whose 6 boxes you're
Okay.
talking about. So lots of people have a 6-box model. Jeannie, which one are you specifically referring to? But so Tom Gilbert had 6 boxes, Tyagis had 6 boxes, but it's the notion that, is it a motivation problem? Is it a structural problem? Is it a knowledge and skill problem? Is it attitudinal? And as you go through, and then there are variations of those. And as you go through, you can identify what kind of problem you're dealing with and then target the intervention. So it's only a training solution if it's a knowledge and skill gap.
Mm.
And if it's a motivational gap, well, then we have a different intervention that we probably need. Attitudinal problems, and I would argue that attitudinal and motivational tend to go hand in hand, but that's a more social and cognitive psychology response versus the behavioralist version that Gilbert and Clark Ulrich and other box guys. Is it Clark Ulrich? I'm not sure if it's Clark Ulrich. But a bunch of these guys, they all come from behavioralist paradigms.
Okay.
And
Jeannie's known Gilbert.
Gilbert's the
model
original. Gilbert's the original. He invented the number 6.
Very, Yeah. Before that, we went from 5 straight to 7.
Well, you know that kids joke, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I can't remember
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
intro. That was the punchline.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened in 9? Well, 7, 8, 9, something. I can't remember.
Yeah.
My kid's now 22. So
Someone in the chat will remind us, I'm sure. They'll
Yeah.
either remember it or they'll have.
oh, they have a kid.
So if if folks listening to us today, we've had a pretty wide-ranging set of things that we've touched on, but what are, I guess, some of the simplest steps that folks could do just to even get started down this pathway?
Well, maybe do more root cause analysis. And the trick with root cause analysis is garbage in, garbage out. So, sometimes it's an access and privilege problem, but because we're only looking for an aptitude or a skill problem, that's it. Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because 7, 8, 9. There you go. That's great. Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Otto. So, if we assume it's an aptitude or skill problem, we will find a root cause for those. But what we need to do is take a step back and try and determine, where in the system is luck popping its head. Where do we have access and privilege issues? What we're doing in the US around DEI is horrifying. At the base level, it's embarrassing. But at a systems level, we're undermining our whole notion of equity for people, both in schools, the workplace, heck, in our communities and so forth. So we need to depoliticize this again and have conversations about the system. And so that's what we should be doing. We should be facilitating conversations about the system and ask ourselves, where is this systemically an issue around aptitude? How is it interplaying then with skill? Because those two go hand in hand. And like Medina said, we cannot differentiate sometimes what's talent and what's skill. How is this an access component? How is this a luck component? How is the invasion of Iran affecting our company now around prices? We're seeing this with the airlines. So how do we help in supporting and mediating some of the issues that arise around talent? And so we should be asking those systems questions.
Mm-hmm. Those systems questions can be something, though, that it could be a source of friction. And so we have that. We've got that sense of that, well, hey, I got to still get a paycheck. And we're not always privileged to be able to actually rock the boat, successfully. So I think it could be a definite challenge for a lot of us in our space.
But isn't that our job? You don't see accountants working in finance worrying about, I'm raising my hand because I see something wrong with the quarterlies. Unless there's fraud going on in the company, you don't see anyone pushing back and saying, how dare you raise this issue? Right. But for us, again, we've politicized some of these things, and that politicization becomes problematic if we're not able to call it out and say, let's talk about it. And it happens culturally. It happens culturally within the organization as well. Sometimes organizations don't feel safe, right? And so we need to look at how do we foster psychological safety. And that doesn't mean that I'm anti people speaking truth to power. Safety is not just being nice. Safety is about making it taking the risks in a way where you're okay to do so. Psychological safety is where people feel that, oh, you know what? I have an issue here. I can talk about it. Doesn't mean that I have permission to attack you. I don't get to call you names. I don't get to be mean or cruel. I hate radical candor. I think it's just giving people permission to be cruel. But that we do want candor. And that's what Amy Edmondson talks a lot about in the original. Well, it's not the original, but her work in psychological safety. Right? Candor is important. Radical candor might be iffy.
Very cool. Matt, this has been a really cool conversation. We've gone lots of places that we don't always get to go in here on Idiotic. I actually, pulling in the thread of what you've just mentioned, definitely appreciate your candor here today and your thoughts, etc. Folks, also, thanks so much for dropping into the chat. Have some great conversation and pieces in there that we were able to weave in. Really appreciate the participation and really appreciate everybody being here today. And one last reminder, this episode of Instructional Designers in Offices, drinking coffee, drinking tea, drinking any hot beverages, cold beverages, just hanging out and having a good discussion. As always, brought to you by the team here at Domino, makers of Domino One, helping L&D teams to develop, scale, and deliver learning that maximizes employee value. Matt, thank you so much for joining us here. It's been a fabulous conversation.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Chris.